4 days after my wife told me she wanted to start trying for a family, I found a text thread on her phone that began with my cousin saying, "Last night was a mistake. We can't keep doing this." She had left her phone on the kitchen counter while she went to grab the laundry. The screen lit up. I was not snooping. I was not suspicious. I was standing there waiting for the kettle to boil, and the words just appeared in front of me like something the universe had decided. I needed to see whether I was ready or not. I set the phone back, down, exactly where she had left it. I finished making my tea. I poured it down the sink because I could not taste anything anymore. My name is Luca. I am 31 years old, and I live in Edmonton, Alberta, which is the kind of city where people measure loyalty in how many winters you have survived together. I had survived 7 winters with my wife. I had survived 31 with my family. What I did not know, standing in my kitchen on a Tuesday evening in February, was that both of those things had been quietly burning for longer than I realized. I thought I understood what betrayal felt like before that night. I thought betrayal was when your cousin borrowed $200 and forgot to pay it back. I thought it was when your best friend took credit for your idea at work. I thought it was when your father promised he would come to your graduation and then didn't because your cousin had a hockey tournament that weekend, and everyone agreed those tickets were too expensive to waste. I did not know betrayal could feel like air, leaving a room so slowly that by the time you noticed it was gone, you had already been suffocating for months. My cousin Grayson was 34, older than me by 3 years, and treated like he was older by a decade in the way that our family worked. He was the one who had the landscaping business, the one who showed up at family dinners with a bottle of Shiraz and a story about a new contract. The one my uncle held up like a blueprint every time someone in the family needed an example of what success looked like. He was charming in the easy way that some people are. The kind of charm that cost them nothing, because they have never had to earn a room. He just walked in and the room reorganized itself around him. When Grayson got fired from his first real job at 22, my uncle said the company had not appreciated him. When Grayson's first long-term relationship ended because he had cheated, my aunt said the woman had been too insecure. When Grayson started his business and ran into debt the first year, my father quietly helped him bridge the gap and never mentioned it again in front of anyone except me. Once, when he thought he was giving me a lesson in loyalty, he said, "You take care of families." I understood that sentence differently by the end of all this. I met my wife, Margot, when I was 24. She was doing her master's degree in urban planning at the University of Alberta, and I was 3 years into working as a site supervisor for a mid-sized construction company. We met at a mutual friend's birthday dinner at a Vietnamese place on White Ave. She was the only person at the table who asked me a follow-up question about my job instead of nodding politely and looking for an excuse to change the subject. I liked her immediately because she was curious in a way that felt directed, not performative. We dated for 2 years and got married on a Saturday in September, in a small ceremony, at a park near my parents' house. Grayson gave a toast. He said, "Luca has always been the dependable one," which is probably why it took him so long to find someone. You don't rush a good thing. Everyone laughed. Margot squeezed my hand under the table. Later when we were in the car driving to the hotel, she said, "That toast was backhanded." I shrugged and said, "That's just how Grayson is." She looked out the passenger window and said, "That shouldn't be an explanation." I should have filed that moment somewhere more accessible. The first 4 years of our marriage were good. Not perfect. Margot sometimes said I went quiet when I was stressed in a way that felt like walls going up. She was right. I come from a family where problems were managed, not discussed, and that habit had calcified in me in ways I was still learning to recognize. I worked long hours during construction season, which in Edmonton means you work hard from April to November, and spend the winter catching up on everything you neglected. Margot worked at the city planning office and had her own pressures. We argued about my hours. We argued about whether we were saving enough. We argued about how often my family expected us to show up for things that were not really optional. Around year 4, Margot started seeming distant, in a way I told myself was work stress. She started going to the gym more, which I told myself was healthy. She started texting more often in the evenings with her phone tilted away from me, which I told myself was her work group chat or her sister. She stopped bringing up the idea of having kids, which had been a topic we visited regularly, and when I raised it once she said she just needed a bit more time to feel ready. I told myself all of those things were normal. I believed every explanation I invented because the alternative required looking directly at something I did not want to see. Grayson started appearing more often around that time. Not in a suspicious way. In the way that seemed almost generous on the surface. He would offer to help with things at our place, fix the back gate that had been sticking, drop off extra lumber he had left over from a job. He texted Margot about family events, which made sense because she and I coordinated our schedules the same way. Once, He offered to drive her to a work event downtown when my truck was in the shop. She mentioned it casually at dinner and I said, "That was nice of him." I said that. I let that happen and called it nice. The text I saw on the counter that Tuesday in February was not the first one. I know that now. But it was the one that made the rest of them impossible to ignore. After Margot came back from the laundry room, I excused myself and said I needed some air. I walked around the block twice in -22 degrees without a proper jacket, and I still felt too hot. When I came back inside, she was watching something on the laptop at the kitchen table. She looked up and smiled and said, "Cold out?" "Yeah," I said. I made myself go to bed. I lay there for 3 hours while she slept next to me. And I tried to find a version of what I had read that did not mean what it meant. I could not find one. I am a practical person. I have spent years reading blueprints and site reports, and looking for errors before they become structural problems. I know how to read something clearly. Last night was a mistake. We can't keep doing this. That sentence only works one way. I waited until Friday. I do not know why I waited. Some part of me was still hoping for an accidental explanation, a context I had missed, a misreading. Some part of me was also terrified of what came after the question. Friday morning, Margot left for work early. I sat at the kitchen table with my coffee, and I started thinking about the last several months in a different order. The gym, the texts, the distance, the drop topic of children, Grayson appearing more, the work event he drove her to. The work event, I called the city planning office. I said I was confirming the venue for an event my wife had attended in October. The receptionist looked it up and said there had been no staff event that evening. I sat with that information for a long time. When Margot came home, I was in the living room. I had turned off the television. She came in and set her bag down and started talking about traffic on the Henday, and I let her finish. Then I said, "How long has it been going on with Grayson?" The word traffic stopped mid-sentence. She turned around and looked at me. And her face did something I will not be able to describe accurately, because I had never seen it on her face before. It was not guilt exactly. It was the face of someone who has been holding something heavy for a long time, and has just been told they can put it down. And they are not sure whether that is relief or collapse. She said, "Luca." I said, "Don't say my name like I'm the one who needs to be managed right now." She sat down in the armchair across from me. She did not sit beside me. That told me something. It started last spring. Spring. 9 months ago. Our entire summer. Every family dinner, every holiday, every time the three of us had been in the same room. How many times? She pressed her hands together in her lap. It wasn't a relationship. We didn't. How many times? She closed her eyes. I don't know exactly. I stood up because I needed somewhere to put myself. I walked to the window. Outside it was dark and the streetlights were making the snow look orange. Did anyone else know? She was quiet for too long. I turned around. "Margot, your aunt," she said. Grayson told her. I don't know when. She called me about a month ago. I felt the room change temperature. My aunt knew? Margot nodded very slightly. She said it needed to stop. She said she didn't want it to destroy the family. The family. That's what she said. I laughed once. It came out wrong. And what did she say about me? Margot looked down. She said if it ended, there was no reason you had to know. I want to write that sentence again, because I want you to understand exactly what it means. My aunt, who had known me my entire life, who had been at my christening and my graduation and my wedding, had decided that the correct response to her son sleeping with my wife was to tell my wife to stop, say nothing to me, and protect the version of our family that had Grayson in it looking clean. She had chosen her side before I ever knew there was a game. That night I slept in the spare room. I did not sleep much. At some point after midnight I heard my phone buzz. It was Grayson. Margot called me. "I'm sorry, man. This got out of hand." I stared at that message for a long time. Got out of hand. Like it was a kitchen fire. Like it was a scheduling conflict. Like it was something that had happened to him rather than something he had decided to do. Repeatedly, over 9 months, with his cousin's wife. I replied, "You slept with my wife." He took 11 minutes to respond. "I know. I don't have an excuse. I just want you to know it wasn't about you." I turned the phone over so the screen faced down. "It wasn't about you." As if that was better. As if the absence of malice made the presence of betrayal smaller. I had spent my entire life in a family where Grayson's choices were never really about anyone. They just always managed to cost someone else something. The next morning I drove to my parents' house before work. My mother opened the door and her face told me she had already received a call. My uncle's car was in the driveway. That was not a coincidence. I walked in without taking off my boots, which I have never done in my parents' house in my life. Grayson was in the kitchen. My uncle was beside him. My mother stayed near the hallway. My father came in from the back room wiping his hands on a cloth. I looked at Grayson stand up. My uncle said, "Luca, let's all sit down," and "I'm not sitting down." My father said, "Lower your voice." "Why?" He blinked. In 31 years I had never responded to that phrase with a question. I looked at Grayson. 9 months. Tell me I'm wrong. Grayson had the decency to look at the floor. Luca, am I wrong? He shook his head. My uncle put his hand on Grayson's shoulders. My son made a serious mistake. We all know that. But tearing this family apart isn't going to help anyone. I turned to him slowly. I'm not tearing anything. I walked into a kitchen. My aunt appeared from the hallway. I had not seen her come in. She said, "We love you. You know that, but Margot is not innocent either. You two have been struggling for." I said, "Don't." She stopped. You knew, I said. You knew a month ago and you decided I didn't need to. Her eyes filled. I was trying to protect everyone. No, you were protecting him. I pointed at Grayson. You have always protected him. That's not the same thing. My father said, Ethan, and then caught himself. He never called me by the wrong name. That small slip told me how rattled he was. My mother said nothing. She stood near the hallway entrance and looked at her hands. I noticed that, and filed it, somewhere. My uncle said, whatever happened, the question now is what we do going forward. Margot wants to work on the marriage. You two could go to counseling. This doesn't have to be, stop. I picked up my keys from the counter where I had set them. I did not come here to negotiate. I came here so that everyone in this room knows that I know. So that nobody gets to pretend in front of me. Grayson said, you always do this, you act like you're above making mistakes. I looked at him. I have never slept with anyone you loved. He had nothing after that. Good. I left without saying goodbye. The week that followed was the administrative wreckage of a life that had to be sorted into piles. I called a lawyer named Patricia Okafor, who had an office on Jasper Avenue. She was precise and unimpressed by drama in a way that I found steadying. She told me not to make any agreements verbally, not to put my name on any joint documents, and to begin separating my finances immediately, which in practice meant contacting my bank, reviewing our joint account, and being very clear about what was mine before any formal proceedings began. She also said, do you have documentation, texts, anything in writing? I had the screenshot of Grayson's message. I had the call log confirming I had contacted the city planning office. I had the date of Grayson's text and the timestamp. She nodded. Hold on to all of it. Margaret asked to talk twice that week. The first time I said I was not ready. The second time she said, I know you don't want to hear this, but I think we should at least try counseling before we make any decisions. I said, I've already made my decision. She said, you haven't even let me explain. You explained. On Friday. That's not. She pressed her fingers to her forehead. Grayson made it seem like you didn't care about us anymore. Like you were just going through the motions. I felt invisible. I sat down because I needed to hear this part and also because I did not want to respond to it from a standing position. I was not a perfect husband, I said. I know that. I worked too much. I went quiet when things were hard. I should have been better at saying out loud that I was grateful for you. She looked up. But Margot, you were lonely in our marriage and you went to my cousin instead of to me. You let that go on for 9 months. You let me sit across from him at Christmas dinner. You let me shake his hand. She started crying. That's not a communication problem, I said. That's a choice. You made it over and over. She didn't answer. There was no answer. I moved into a short-term rental in the Glenora neighborhood. A 2-bedroom unit in a low-rise building that smelled like fresh paint and other people's fresh starts. I called my father that same night. He answered on the second ring, which was unusual. I said, did you know? Long pause. No, did Mom? Another pause. Longer. Your mother got a call from your aunt. About 2 weeks ago. She told me last night. I closed my eyes. She didn't know how to tell you, my father said. She thought it might resolve on its own. Dad, I know. She sat at dinner with me last week and said nothing. I know, Luca. There was a heaviness in his voice that I recognized. He was not defending her. He was acknowledging the thing without knowing what to do with it. My father has always been a man who expressed love through presence rather than language, and this moment required language. And he was not built for it. I understood that and I was still angry about it. My mother called the next morning, and I let it go to voicemail. She said she was sorry. She said she had panicked. She said she thought, if she waited, things might settle before they exploded. She was not wrong that they exploded. She was wrong about what she owed me in the meantime. My aunt organized what she called a family dinner 2 weeks later. She sent a message to the whole group saying it was time to come together, and that tension between family members was only hurting everyone. She listed the time and the address as if she were confirming a reservation, and not asking me to walk back into a room with the person who had slept with my wife. I almost deleted the message without responding. Then my father's younger brother, my uncle Terrence, called me. Terrence was the quiet one in the family. He lived in Spruce Grove and came to family events with homemade wine and well-timed silences. He said, your aunt is telling people, you're having a breakdown, and taking it out on Grayson. Of course she is. She also said Margot is struggling, and you've abandoned her. I exhaled slowly. Terrence, Margot slept with my cousin for 9 months. I know. Do you want to come on Sunday? I asked. He said. I was hoping you'd ask. I went to the dinner with a folder. The house smelled like roast potatoes and a version of normal that everyone had agreed to pretend was still available. My aunt had arranged the table like a formal occasion, the good dishes, cloth napkins, everyone assigned a seat. Grayson was already there when I arrived. He stood by the kitchen island with a beer, and watched me walk in the same way you watch a weather system approach a window. My cousin Shannon, Grayson's younger sister, gave me a hug at the door that felt genuine. She whispered, "I had no idea. I'm so sorry." I believed her. My uncle took up his usual position at the head of the table, and started a speech about how families faced hard seasons, and what mattered was whether you came out the other side together. I let him finish. Then I said, "Can I ask everyone something?" The table went quiet. Does everyone here know exactly what happened? Not a version of it. What actually happened? My aunt said, "Luca, this isn't the time to." "You chose the time," I said. "I just showed up." I opened the folder. I put the screenshot of Grayson's text message in the center of the table. This is Grayson admitting to sleeping with my wife. In writing. 11 minutes after I confronted Margot, my cousin Shannon made a sound. My uncle picked up the paper. I also called my wife's workplace. There was no staff event the evening Grayson offered to drive her downtown in October. I put the call log beside the text. And this. I placed a printed copy of my aunt's conversation with Margot, which Margot had sent me 3 days prior in what I think was her way of being honest when it was too late to be useful. This is my aunt, telling my wife not to tell me. 1 month before I found out. My aunt's face went the color of winter sky. My uncle said, "Where did you get that?" Margot sent it to me. She knew it was going to come out eventually. Grayson put his beer down. "You really did this in front of everyone." I looked at him. "You really did what you did for 9 months." "I just brought paper." Shannon said, "This, don't, hit." My uncle's jaw tightened. "This doesn't help us, find a way forward," I said. "I'm not here to find a way forward with you. I'm here because your wife told half the family I was having a breakdown. I wanted everyone to have the actual information." My aunt began to cry. I was trying to keep this family from breaking. Terrence, who had been sitting quietly at the corner of the table, said, "Donna, you kept it from Sukatha. You didn't keep anything from breaking. You just decided he was the one who didn't need to know." The table went completely still. My aunt looked at Terrence with an expression I recognized. It was the same expression my aunt had given every person who had ever pointed out something true about Grayson in a room she controlled. Grayson said, "Uncle Terry, hurry, stay out of it." Terrence said, "You had an affair with your cousin's wife. You don't get to moderate this conversation." I almost smiled. I did not. My uncle said, "Luca, what do you want? Tell me what you want." I looked at him. That's the first reasonable question anyone has asked me in 3 weeks. Nobody spoke. "I want the separation to proceed without interference from this family. I want Grayson to stop texting me. I want my aunt to stop telling people a version of events that centers on my reaction instead of his actions. I want to be left alone to rebuild my life. And I want everyone in this room to be honest with themselves about why no one called me." My aunt said, "We didn't call you. Because we thought it would destroy you." I said, "No. You didn't call me because you thought it would destroy the version of this family that keeps Grayson in it." Grayson pushed back from the table. "You want to be the victim so badly." I looked at him. "I am not performing anything, Grayson. That's the difference between us. You've been performing your whole life. I'm just telling the truth." He went quiet. His face was red, but he was quiet. I picked up the folder. "I'm going to leave now. I'm not doing this for drama. I did it so Tone gets to look confused at the next family event about why I'm not there." My mother, who had said almost nothing the entire evening, reached out and touched my arm as I passed her chair. She did not say anything. She just held my arm for a second. I did not stop, but I did not pull away either. We would have a different conversation another time. Not tonight. I walked out while my aunt called my name. I did not stop. The aftermath was not quiet, but it was clarifying. Shannon called me that night and apologized again, and said she had suspected something was off with Grayson for months but had not known what. Terrence sent a text that said, "You handled that well. Too well if I'm honest. You deserve to be angrier." I saved that message. Grayson's girlfriend of 2 years, a woman named, I'll be honest, I never learned her last name, found out through Shannon 3 days later and left him. Apparently she had believed he was going through a hard time professionally. She had not known the hard time had a name. My aunt sent me a series of messages over the following week. They were long. They swung between explaining herself and blaming me for the dinner scene, and asking me to think about what I was doing to the family. The last one ended with, "You are not who I thought you were if you can walk away from people who love you." I replied once, "I'm exactly who you thought I was. I just stopped pretending the people in that room loved me the way I thought." Then I blocked her. My mother came to my rental apartment 3 weeks later. She called ahead, which she never did, and I understood that as an acknowledgement that things had changed in terms of what she was owed automatically. She sat on my second-hand couch, with her hands folded in her lap. And she said, "I should have told you, Immediately. I sat across from her. Yes. I panicked. Your aunt called me, and I didn't know what to do and I thought if Grayson stopped, if it just ended, then maybe you could stay in the marriage without knowing and without being hurt. I looked at her for a long moment. Mom. You were making a decision for me about my own life. She pressed her lips together. I know. You decided I didn't have the right to know what was happening to me. I was trying to protect you. You were trying to protect the outcome. She looked down. After a long pause she said, I know the difference, I just let myself believe I didn't. That was the most honest thing my mother had ever said to me. It did not fix what she had done. But it was real. I appreciated the realness even though the damage was still there. I said. I'm not shutting you out. But things are different now, she nodded. She looked like she had aged, not physically. Just in the way someone looks when something they believed about themselves has been revised. Your father wants to come, she said. Not yet, I said. She accepted that. The legal process in Alberta was cleaner than I expected, not fast, but honest. Patricia walked me through the separation agreement, the division of our joint assets, the shared vehicle, the TFSA contributions we had made together. Margot did not contest much. I think she understood that she was not in a position to, and I also think that somewhere underneath everything, she was still the person who had asked follow-up questions about my job at a Vietnamese restaurant, and she knew what the right thing looked like even when she had chosen a different thing. We sold the house. The proceeds were split. I kept my truck. She kept the furniture. She asked to meet for coffee in April. About 2 months after the separation was filed. I almost said no. My father's younger brother Terrence said, go, you don't have to forgive her, but don't let her become a story you never finished reading. So I went. She looked smaller somehow, not physically. Just quieted. Like something in her that used to take up space had been set down. She said, I don't expect anything from this conversation. I said, I just wanted to say, without Grayson in the room, without your family's versions of events, that I made choices. Not mistakes. Choices. I chose to keep seeing him when I knew it was wrong. I chose to let your aunt convince me that silence was protection. I chose to bring up starting a family with you while I was already in the middle of what I was doing, and I don't know exactly what I was thinking in that moment, but I know it wasn't fair to you. I looked at my coffee cup. No, I said. It wasn't. I was lonely, she said. And that's real, but loneliness is not a permission slip. I should have talked to you. I should have said out loud that I felt like you were disappearing into work and I needed more. I didn't. I went sideways instead of forward. That was the most accountable I had ever heard her be about anything. No hormones, no circumstance, no he made me feel. Just ownership. I respected it. That did not mean I wanted her back. Respect and desire are different rooms in the same house, and I was not interested in returning to the building. I said. I hope you become a better version of yourself than you were in our marriage. I mean that without cruelty. She nodded. Her eyes were wet. I hope the same thing for you. When I left the coffee hall, I sat in my truck for a few minutes in the parking lot on White Ave and let myself feel the specific weight of an ending. Not relief, not joy, not grief exactly. Just the quiet on the other side of something that has been loud for a long time. Grayson moved to Calgary 6 months later. Everybody I see in the family said it was for a new contract. I think it was because Edmonton had become too small for the version of himself he needed people to see. Calgary is a 20-minute flight away, which means he did not go far. He just went far enough. My uncle and aunt have not separated. My uncle came to my rental once, alone, in June. He stood in my doorway and said, I handled this wrong. I said, which part? He said, all of it. I protected Grayson because I've always protected Grayson and I never stopped to think about what it cost the people around him. Including him. I leaned against the doorframe. What changed? He said. He called me last month for money. 3rd time in a year. And I realized I have spent 20 years making sure he never had to face the weight of anything he did. And now he cannot carry anything because I never let him build the muscle. That was more insight than I had expected from him. I told him so. He said, I'm not asking you to come back to Sunday dinners good. I'm just asking you to know that I see it now. I nodded. I hear you. That was as far as I could go with him that day. He accepted it. That mattered to me. My mother and I have dinner once a month now. It is careful in the way that things are careful after they have been dropped and glued back together. You can see where the break was, but the pieces hold. My father and I rebuilt something different. He started calling me on Sunday mornings, which he had never done in 30 years of my life. We talk about work, about hockey, about the price of lumber, which he likes to complain about because he spent 30 years in the trades, and believes the current cost of a 2x4 is personal. Sometimes we talk about other things. Once unprompted he said, you deserve better from all of us. I said yeah. He said I know sorry doesn't cover it. I said no. But it counts. He made a sound that I think was relief. I went to therapy starting in March. A psychologist named Dr. Anand, who had an office near the university, and who had a way of letting silence be a tool rather than a gap to fill. She helped me understand some things about how I had learned to manage conflict by disappearing into productivity. How I had inherited the family system of smoothing, rather than confronting.
Totep.
How I had been carrying the emotional labor of keeping things comfortable for everyone in a room and calling it stability. It was not pleasant work, it was necessary work. I started dating again about a year later. Slowly, I went for coffee with a woman I met through a work contact. On our second date, she asked about my family and I told her a shortened version. She blinked twice and said, "That is either a movie or a cautionary tale." I said, "Both, probably." She laughed. It was an actual laugh, unguarded and quick. I had forgotten how good those sounded. I think about the life I was building before that Tuesday in February sometimes. Not with longing. More the way you think about a route you used to drive to work when you lived in a different neighborhood. It was the route. Iquat. Then it wasn't. You find another way. I do not hate Margot. I do not hate Grayson. I do not have space in my daily life for that kind of ongoing maintenance. What I have instead is clarity. I know who I am. I know what I will accept and what I will not. I know that silence is not peace. It is just the sound of a problem that has not announced itself yet. And I know that loyalty that only flows in one direction is not loyalty. It is a debt dressed up as love. My family told me I was making a permanent decision in a temporary moment of anger. What they did not understand was that I was not acting from anger. I was acting from information. The people who love you should be the last ones to decide you don't deserve to know what is happening to your own life. When they become the first ones to make that call, you learn something irreversible about the architecture of what you are living. Inside, I walked out and I built something smaller and more honest in its place. That is not a tragedy. That is a start.